Watch closely. The professor is right in the middle of his lecture, but that bespectacled dude over there is slyly buried in an extracurricular book. All of a sudden, the professor dishes out a test paper to each student. These are 10 mind-bogglingly tough ones, all centered around advanced math and quantum physics. These students, they're all freshly minted doctoral candidates at the University of Cambridge. We're talking about the cream of the crop, 1 in 100,000 kind of talent. The professor gives them a whole 7 days to crack this thing. But truth be told, he's not really expecting them to ace it. I mean, most of these questions would even stump a bunch of experts. But our bespectacled friend here, he's completely forgotten about it the moment he steps out of class. Day 1, he's out rowing, soaking up the beauty of nature and getting his adrenaline pumping. Day 2, he's messing around with marbles, testing his luck for the month. Day 3, he's on his bike, cruising around. Day 4, he's at the bar, drowning his cares in booze. Day 5, he's at a dance, trying to charm the ladies. And day 6 and 7, he's whacking balls in a game of croquet. Finally, it's the day to turn in those test papers. In the morning, when it's time to head to class, this guy is still snoozing away. Never trust what a straight student says. A classmate comes to rouse the guy. Hey, how many of those 10 impossible questions did you manage to solve? The guy's like, what questions? I don't have a clue. The classmate just laughs and says, you're kidding, right? The test papers the professor assigned last week are due any minute. If the professor blows his top, we can kiss our graduation goodbye. As soon as the classmate bolts, the guy realizes he's in deep trouble. He leaps out of bed and starts scouring the room for the test papers. Glancing out the window, he sees the rest of the class already making their way to the classroom. There's only 20 minutes left before class starts. He finally lays his hands on the papers, takes one look and thinks, holy cow, these are brutal. He grabs an answer sheet to start working on them, but in his haste, he spills coffee all over it. Now he's screwed. It takes him another 5 minutes to hunt down a new piece of paper. By the time he bursts into the classroom, the other students have already handed in their papers. He scrambles to his seat. These are the 10 toughest physics questions in history. The professor is clearly not amused. How is it possible that none of you could even solve the second question? Solving just 1 out of 10 is basically the same as handing in a blank slate. Steven, let's see what you've got. The guy frantically digs into his pockets and, to everyone's shock, pulls out a train timetable. The professor's like, what the heck? Are you planning to catch a train home? The guy quickly stammers, I had a major mishap and had to write on the back of this. The professor flips it over and his jaw drops. This is the correct answer, and the solution is so concise. I've never seen anything like it. At this point, the guy casually drops the bombshell. Well,
you could only do 9.
The classmates all stare at him in disbelief. They spent 7 days sweating bullets and could only solve 1. The professor, on the other hand, is beaming.
Oh, thank God. Bravo.
Is this what sets a genius apart from the average Joe? The guy has freaking solved 9 of the toughest physics questions out there. His classmates are left gobsmacked. Just a little while ago when I came to rouse you, you said you hadn't even started on any of them. How on earth did you knock out 9 questions in a blink? The guy shrugs and says, yep, I really hadn't tackled them before. I just whipped out the solutions to these 9 questions right after getting out of bed. The whole crowd is even more flabbergasted. What? Nailing 9 questions in a measly 15 minutes? Holy cow, this guy's a super genius. The professor ushers the guy wonder into his office and quizzes him. Have you zeroed in on what research topic you're gonna dig into this semester? He brainiac answers, not a clue yet. Math and physics are both my jam. I've been acing these 2 subjects since I was a little tight. Spotting his quandary, the professor leads him to a state-of-the-art lab at the University of Cambridge. It's chock full of all kinds of mind-blowing instruments. The guy is completely entranced, gaping at an atomic model, an electron analyzer, and a whole array of high-tech gizmos. This is the most remarkable laboratory in the world. Back in 1897, Thomson made the earth-shattering discovery of the electron right here. And in 1909, Rutherford split the atomic nucleus in this very place. This lab is like the holy grail of scientific breakthroughs. And get this, the professor is handing over the keys to this sacred space to our bespectacled hero all by himself. It's this very lab that sets the stage for the mind-blowing journey of this guy. He's gonna go on to be hailed as the king of the cosmos. Yup, he's none other than Stephen William Hawking. Fast forward to 1963. Hawking is knee-deep in his Doctor of Philosophy and Physics studies at Cambridge. Back then, he was in tip-top shape. At a wild party, Hawking spots a girl and it's love at first sight, so he musters up the courage to make a move. "I'm Hawking. What's your name?" The girl says, "I'm Jane." One's a science whiz and the other's a literature lover. Jane's a devout believer and hits the church every week. But Hawking's an atheist through and through, convinced that a single unified equation can unlock the secrets of the entire universe. And that's exactly what he's on a mad quest to find. Even the father of the universe, Stephen Hawking, has a soft spot for a special girl. The two of them are huddled on the stairs, chatting up a storm. When the party wraps up, they can't seem to get enough of each other. As Jane's about to leave, she slips Hawking a note with her phone number scrawled on it. From that moment on, along with the vast expanse of the universe, Jane's planted herself firmly in Hawking's heart. The professor dishes out homework, asking them to crack 10 tough questions. But Hawking's got eyes only for that little piece of paper. And that's how the wild story we started with unfolds. Hawking blazes through 9 of those gnarly questions in just 15 minutes flat. The professor checks in. Yep, all 9 are spot on. The professor hands over the lab to Hawking's care. Before taking off, he spills the beans that he's gonna take him to a lecture by the math wizard Roger in London next week. Once the professor's gone, Hawking's standing there, eyeballing these experimental gadgets like he's having a psychic connection with all the great minds who've used them before. Before hitting the lecture, Hawking takes the plunge and invites Jane over for dinner at his pad. Jane pries, "Why don't you buy into the whole God thing?" Hawking lays it all out, saying that physicists can't let a supernatural creator muck up their thinking. Then Hawking pops the question, asking Jane to be his dance partner at the upcoming shindig. Stephen Hawking is an absolute maestro when it comes to wooing the ladies. On the big day of the dance, they both show up looking like $1,000,000, and the sparks between them are flying even hotter. All of a sudden, the lights in the joint go dim. Jane spots that the dude's bow ties are shining brighter than the girls' gowns. Hawking spills the beans and says it's all thanks to the laundry detergent. The fluorescent stuff in it glows like crazy under ultraviolet light. You know what? When stars are born and go kaput, they shoot out ultraviolet radiation. If we could see that in the night sky, it'd be like front row seats to the most mind-blowing show of star birth and death. Jane's never heard this kind of cool physics stuff before. With Hawking breaking it down, it's like the most romantic thing ever. There are these insane fireworks lighting up the blue sky. The two lovebirds, seeing this amazing scene, start twirling around on the Cambridge Bridge and end up in a warm embrace. Next morning, Jane gets a box of laundry detergent from Hawking. It's their little secret code, just between the two of them. Hawking hops on the train to catch that lecture. The mathematician Roger is laying out his wild discovery. Stars are on a one-way trip to collapsing and turn into black holes. And when they shrink down to nothing, they morph into space-time singularities. Roger's finding really gets Hawking's gears turning. How in the world can someone become a brainiac like Stephen Hawking? Well, this guy can find inspiration in just about anything. Hawking's pouring milk into his coffee, and as that milk starts swirling around, it's like a light bulb goes off in his head and he's thinking about the whole universe. If Einstein's general theory of relativity is on the money and the universe is slowly puffing up, then if we rewind time, the universe is shrinking. Keep going back like that, and it gets tinier and tinier, denser and denser, hotter and hotter. Eventually, it all smooshes together into an itsy-bitsy singularity. That's the starting line of time. The professor's jaw hits the floor when he hears Hawking's wild idea and tells him to keep crunching those numbers. From that moment on, Hawking camps out in the classroom, calculating like a madman. The whole universe is bouncing around in his noggin, but then, bit by bit, Hawking's fingers start playing tricks on him. The words he writes look like a drunk spider's been crawling across the page. But does he stop? No way. He just keeps grinding away, over and over. Finally, he nails it. Stephen Hawking has cracked the formula for the theory of everything. He bolts out of the lab, dying to share his mind-blowing discovery with his professor. But then, out of nowhere, God throws him a curveball. Hawking's legs turn to jelly and he hits the deck. After a whole bunch of tests, the doc drops a bombshell. Hawking's got motor neuron disease, aka ALS. The average lifespan after getting hit with this is a measly 2 years. His brain's still firing on all cylinders, but eventually, no one will have a clue what's going on in his head. Watching the doc walk away, Hawking's world comes crashing down. His mind's filled with the infinite cosmos, but now it feels like he's got a death sentence hanging over him. Hawking's got L's. The neurons go haywire and start munching away at the brain cells that control his muscles. Little by little, talking, walking, and breathing are gonna be a struggle. In the end, he'll be completely paralyzed, and his thoughts will be locked away in his head. This news hits Hawking like a freaking freight train. Stephen Hawking only has 2 years left to live. He goes into total isolation, cutting off all ties. Jane gets wind of this from her roommate and rushes over to see him, but Hawking tells Jane to scram. Watching him so broken and beaten, Jane has a brainwave and challenges him to a game of croquet. She says, "If you manage to win this, I'll vanish from your life for good." Jane's eyes get all misty as she witnesses Hawking giving it his all on the lawn, struggling to play croquet. Hawking storms back into his room and in a fit of rage, trashes a chair. Jane, hot on his heels, declares with unwavering determination, "I'm sticking with you. I'll be by your side for every single moment you have left." Jane delicately removes Hawking's glasses, wipes them squeaky clean with the edge of her dress, and then carefully places them back on his face. There, now you can see the world crystal clear again, right? With Jane's rock-solid support, Hawking zeroes in on his research topic and timeline. Soon after, to tie the knot, a year down the line, their first bundle of joy arrives. By now, Hawking is only able to hobble around with a crutch. This is the doctoral dissertation of Stephen Hawking, the so-called king of the universe. Out of the blue, when the professors lay eyes on his work, they start nitpicking. The first chapter is short on data, the second chapter is just a rehash of Roger's ideas, and the third chapter is full of unanswered questions. Hearing this barrage of criticism, Hawking's head droops. But then, when the professor gets to the fourth chapter, about that mind-boggling black hole at the origin of time, this is pure gold, Hawking finally cracks a smile. He boasts, "I'm gonna whip up a simple and drop-dead gorgeous equation to explain the whole shebang." After walking out of that classroom, Hawking grins like he can already feel the universe giving him a standing ovation. Friends throw a shindig to celebrate Hawking's graduation. At the dinner table, everyone is yuking it up, but poor Hawking can't even get a grip on a spoon. He quietly slips away from the table. By this stage, ALS has turned his legs into dead weights. He has to wedge his arm into the stairwell crack and use every ounce of his upper body strength to inch his way up. He looks up at his son perched on the stairs. Hope is right there, tantalizingly close, yet so far out of reach. Jane is quick to pick up on Hawking's distress and gets him a wheelchair. Jane always pulls him out of the pits of despair. Before long, their second little munchkin makes an appearance. How does Stephen Hawking's revolutionary radiation theory come to be? One day, Hawking is trying to wrangle himself into his clothes when his head gets stuck. Peering through the gap in the fabric, he catches sight of the flames in the fireplace, and it seems just like a gazillion particles making a break for it from a black hole. And just like that, the world-renowned Hawking radiation theory is born. He hypothesizes that a black hole isn't pitch black after all, but steadily gives off heat and eventually goes out with a bang. His theory hits the magazines and, boom, Hawking becomes an overnight sensation. He also scores an electric wheelchair, which makes getting around a breeze. He often has a riot with his two kids in the room. Jane, on the other hand, has to juggle taking care of the kids and Hawking while keeping up with her own studies. It is all too much, and she's constantly on the verge of a meltdown, sneaking off to cry her eyes out. Her mom sees the strain and suggests she join the church choir. That's where she bumps into Jonathan, a devout Christian. He is as warm as a summer's day, has a heart of gold, and can tickle the ivories like a pro. Stephen Hawking is being two-timed. One day, Hawking rolls up at home and what does he see? Jonathan teaching his kiddo to tickle the ivories. Thanks to this guy, Jane finally gets a moment to catch her breath. After chowing down, Hawking has a chin wag with Jonathan and finds out that Jonathan's wife kicked the bucket due to leukemia a year back. Since then, he's been feeling all alone and it's the music that's been his saving grace. Hawking looks a bit spaced out. Before splitting, Jonathan pipes up and says he's on standby to lend a hand whenever they need it. Late that night, Hawking eyeballs Jane. She's been shouldering way too much. He mutters, "If there's someone who can give you a break, I'm cool with it." Jane doesn't utter a peep but just cradles Hawking's noggin. From that moment on, Jonathan starts popping by to help out and slowly forms his way into the family. He's super attentive to Hawking. They all go on these fun outings, bouncing around on the beach. Bit by bit, Jonathan and Jane are getting cozier and cozier. Before long, Jane's popping out her third kiddo. But the vibe at the shindig is a bit of weird. Stephen Hawking's got L's and can't move a muscle. But out of the blue, his wife is preggers. Hawking's mom storms up to Jane and demands to know who the daddy really is. Jane stands her ground and snaps. Do you seriously think I'm that sleazy? The father of my child is and will always be Hawking. Their little tiff is overheard by Jonathan lurking outside the door. He spills the beans about his feelings for Jane, but then decides to bail. I can't wreck your family, he says. Jane has no choice but to nod. And Hawking's watching this whole drama unfold and making some heavy-duty decisions. Soon after, Hawking's got an invite to a concert in Bordeaux. He jets off with his student. Knowing Jane's got a phobia of flying, he makes a beeline for the church to ask Jonathan if he'd go on a road trip with Jane and the kids to Bordeaux. Maybe even do some camping on the way. With Jonathan around, Jane finally cracks a smile. They're pitching tents together, horsing around with the kids. They look like the perfect little family unit. But this idyllic scene gets smashed to smithereens by a bolt from the blue. Jane gets a frantic call that Hawking's keeled over at the concert and is in here fighting for his life. Jane zooms over right away. Stephen Hawking's completely paralyzed and barely hanging on. The doc gives the option to let him pass peacefully, but Jane shoots that down pronto. Hawking's got pneumonia and is relying on a ventilator to stay alive. This guy's got the whole universe swirling around in his head. He can't just check out like that. The doc does a tracheotomy. It saves his life, but now he's lost his voice for good. Jane bundles Hawking onto the plane back to Cambridge. Before taking off, Jane gives Jonathan a big, long hug. This time, she's making the tough call to let go. After the op, Hawking finds out he can't speak. He just sits there in his wheelchair, with a ton of despair in his eyes. It's like the vast universe has given him the cold shoulder. The doc warned that with L's, eventually people won't have a clue what he's thinking. For a scientific genius with the cosmos in his noggin, not being able to express himself, that's a nightmare on steroids. To make sure Hawking's well taken care of, Jane hires a nurse named Elaine. How did Stephen Hawking, who couldn't speak, write A Brief History of Time? Well, the nurse Elaine is a total pro. She can suss out what Hawking's trying to get across using a groovy colored alphabet board. Thanks to her top-notch TLC, Hawking starts to climb out of that dark hole and becomes a whole lot more chipper. These two are getting so tight that it makes Jane feel like they're the real deal and she's on the sidelines. One fine day, a buddy shows up with a slick smart wheelchair for Hawking. It's decked out with a nifty little screen and a voice converter. All he's gotta do is use a remote, and he can bang out whatever he wants to say.
My name is Stephen Hawking.
With this bad boy of a device in his corner, Hawking decides it's time to dig deep and pen a book. And that book is the mind-blowing A Brief History of Time that rocks the whole wide world. After a spell, Jane's printing out the manuscript of the book and is over the moon to see it mentions God. She reads out a line, "Who are we and why are we here?" If we can find the answers to these two brainbusters, it'll be a ginormous leap in the history of human thought. Because then, we'll really get what God's all about. Hawking, the die-hard atheist, finally tips his hat to the idea of God's existence. And Jane's all like, finally, he gets where I'm coming from. Hawking writes A Brief History of Time but ends up losing his wife Jane. Hawking types a line on that screen and, after hemming, he hits the key.
I have asked Elaine to travel with me to America.
Back in the day, it was always Jane by his side. Hawking dropping this bombshell means their marriage is kaput. Jane's bawling her eyes out. The doc said Hawking only had 2 years left, but lo and behold, they've already clocked 25 years. All those years, Jane's been his rock, never bailing. Hawking's super grateful to her, but love's cruel joke is that it still fizzles out. Jane crouches down and looks Hawking dead in the eye.
Have loved you.
And just like that, their love story is history. Hawking's got tears streaming down his face as he stares at the woman he used to be crazy about. He can't even reach out and give her a hug. After the split, Jane hooks up with Jonathan and they're locking lips like there's no tomorrow. They can finally be together. And Hawking's A Brief History of Time is a smash hit. He's giving a speech and his witty comebacks and laid-back humor have the crowd in stitches. Stephen Hawking, who's completely paralyzed, has this wild vision. An audience member asks, "You said you don't believe in God. So what's your life mantra that you can share with us? Hawking's about to dish out an answer when he spots a pen tumbling to the floor. And then, Hawking's legs start to tingle and he can actually stand up. He shuffles forward and scoots up the pen for the lady. But it's all just a daydream. Hawking cracks a rueful smile and spills the beans. We humans are just a bunch of fancy primates chilling on a teensy-weensy planet. There are bazillions of galaxies outside our Milky Way. Since the dawn of human civilization, we've been on a non-stop quest. What's the edge of the universe? There's gotta be a mind-blowing answer.
And what can be more special than that there is no boundary?
We're all one of a kind. No matter how tough life gets, you'll always find your own way to shine.
While there is life, there is hope.
The moment he wraps it up, the audience erupts in a deafening round of applause. A few years down the line, Stephen Hawking gets a royal summons from the Queen of the UK, and Jane gets a letter from Hawking asking her to tag along. The whole fam makes their way to the palace. Jane, just like old times, gives Hawking's glasses a quick swipe with the hem of her skirt. It's like a time warp, taking them back decades in a split second. The sun's beaming down on them. Jane and Hawking watch their 3 kiddos running around and having a blast. It's like time stands still. Hawking taps out a line on that screen of his. Jane leans in real close to read it. Check out what we've pulled off. And then, it's like we're hitting rewind. Hawking hasn't penned that famous book yet. He can still talk up a storm. The kids are nowhere in sight. These 2 lovebirds haven't even tied the knot. Time's flowing in reverse, like we're zooming all the way back to square one. Hawking's life story plays out like a wild, fast-paced movie montage, flashing by in a matter of seconds. But he was diagnosed with ALS at 21 and kicked the bucket at 76. That's 55 long years of duking it out with that nasty disease. Even a brainiac like him had to put in the daily grind and build up that knowledge bit by bit. It blows our minds to think how he managed to hang in there. Maybe it was his insatiable thirst for the secrets of the universe, his burning passion for science, or that unwavering focus that made the name Stephen Hawking a household name around the globe. Having a good wife can turn you into a great man like Stephen Hawking. When people mention Hawking, they know he is a physicist, a cosmologist, and a scientific thinker, with countless honors. Under his leadership, we were able to extend our thoughts from the Earth to the universe. But while he achieved so much, Jane deserves a great deal of credit. She firmly stood by Hawking's side the moment she learned of his illness. Hawking's teacher even had a talk with Jane once. The teacher reminded her, "You don't even know what you're up against. You're fighting against science, and there's no chance of winning this battle." Jane proved with her actions what she had said, "I'll stay with you for as long as you live." In his later years, Hawking could only move his eyes and 3 fingers. Under such difficult circumstances, Jane still remained by his side. Even after the divorce, the 2 were still good friends. Many people were touched by their love. Their love wasn't passionate and flamboyant, but rather like a gentle stream flowing steadily. However, compared to the universe, humans are still extremely tiny. The Earth has a history of 4.6 billion years. There have been many civilizations during this period, while human civilization is only about 3 million years old. In the vast expanse of the universe, the Earth is just a tiny part, let alone humans. Hawking wanted to explore the entire universe, but how could he achieve this all by himself? Just as a trickle of water can converge into a vast river, as Hawking said, the universe has no boundaries. But where there is life, there is hope. We can still keep exploring. This film is called The Theory of Everything. It's a biographical movie about Hawking's youth. When the movie premiered, Hawking was also in the audience, watching his own life being portrayed on the screen. His eyes were filled with tears. This movie is great. It's recommended to watch the original film. Well, that's all for this episode. If you like it, remember to like and subscribe. See you next time. Bye.